Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the Gestalt Get-Together. Hello, I'm Corinne Zmoos. I'm a speech-language pathologist, and I love Gestalt language processors. If you're here, you probably love GLPs too. Maybe you're really curious about this whole idea or framework around GLP. Maybe you're a parent listening later. To everyone, welcome. I'm really glad you're here. So tonight's episode is going to be a little more casual. And by casual, I mean interactive. So what I'd love to do tonight, I don't have a script prepared. So we're going to do some improv, but luckily I love improv. It feels like I'm back on stage again. We're going to do some Q&A. So those of you who are here, I just want you to start to think about what is a question I would really love to ask about Gestalt language processing or related ideas. So we're going to do some Q&A there. I'd also love to hear from people. So what are some of your wins lately with your GLPs? I think it's really important to take time to reflect on what is working. Maybe it's a technique that you learned from one of these episodes. Maybe it's a technique that you picked up on from a colleague. Maybe it's something you came up with, like you came up with it in the moment in a session and you're like, oh, that worked. So let's start there. While I'm outlining some of the objectives I'd like to hit today, if you're here live, please open up the chat. Tell me a win that you have had with a Gestalt language processor in your life. It can be small. Very often the small wins are really, really big for the kids that we work with. While you're putting your wins in the chat, I want to go over the objectives that we were supposed to hit tonight with my guest. And I'm really going to try and hit those as best I can, again, without a prepared script for the other side of the conversation. And again, if you're just joining, please throw some wins in the chat of what you've experienced with your GLPs lately. So the original objectives that I'm going to try and tap into, number one, talking about how Gestalts can focus as emotional anchors. And I'd love to talk about what that means. And what I did prepare a little bit for tonight was pulling from kind of the psychological research and perspectives about therapeutic alliance, as well as how we can posture ourselves with clients and families related to their emotional experience, kind of that counseling side that I know more and more programs are requiring that we get some counseling experience. Some other things around the first objective was the idea of how GLPs can revisit experiences and then process those emotional experiences through producing a spoken Gestalt, and how we can start to identify those emotionally charged Gestalts and connect with them. So that was the first objective that I'm going to try and tap into tonight. Also talking about co-regulation. It really is a big word. And a big idea that people are more and more trying to tap into about what does it mean to co-regulate with a child, especially a child whose nervous system might be very different than your own, and how we can use familiar language, scripts, and special interests, which is my favorite thing to talk about, using those things to help with co-regulation. And then the third objective that we had been planning on tonight was talking about practical strategies for supporting emotional development through language for Gestalt language processors. And that's what I always like to leave you guys with, are a couple of concrete ideas that you can try tomorrow. Okay, so again, if you are just joining, I would love to start by throwing some wins in the chat. The first one I'm seeing is someone said that a Gestalt language processor in their life, they used a mitigated script during play. I'm so curious what the original was, what was the original Gestalt, and then how they mitigated it. As we keep going, feel free to throw those wins in there. I'd love to pivot now to, for those of you who are attending live, any questions that have come up for you related to Gestalt language processing as a concept, but also don't be shy about putting a specific question about a client. We can do a bit of case coaching here, of course, de-identified. Something I like to do when I'm doing coaching, whether that's one-to-one coaching with another therapist or with a parent, is I ask for them to think about think about your hardest session, the hardest moment of the hardest session. What do you wish you knew in that moment? Because that can help you funnel funnel the kind of information that you need to know. Because I know that when I'm having a hard moment during a session, my brain can go blank sometimes. And those are the moments when I wish I had more ideas to pull from. So if you're able to think of a topic or a question or a client in your life that you'd like some live coaching on or ideas about, please don't be shy about putting that in the chat. So what I'm going to do is pull from some of the papers that I had collected to support some of Rachel's ideas. And the first one I wanted to pull from is, I was really excited to find this. So it was called Echolalia as Communicative Strategy, Fictive Interaction in the Speech of Children with Autism. And so, as always, let me get you guys who are here live the link to that one so that you can check it out. This is a paper that is available for free. You know I love when papers are free. I'm going to copy and paste that to y'all. Here it comes. Yeah, so it's got that link. It's got the free PDF. So this idea of fictive interaction, it caught my attention because when I saw fictive, I thought of fiction. And when I think about a lot of Gestalt processors that I've interacted with, or, so many of the case questions and anecdotes I've heard, GLPs are really drawn to narrative. They're drawn to works of fiction. I think about the television episodes that they love, the YouTube videos, the songs that feel like stories. Narrative is very appealing. And so much of the therapy that I implement is about using narrative, about putting new ideas into a story that can kind of become a narrative whole. So when I saw this paper about echolalia as a strategy, which to me that feels very intuitive, I see echolalia being a strategy. But this idea of fictive interaction, I was like, what does that mean? So ideas around fictive interaction is that this is a type of interaction when there is a non-genuine conversational turn that appears in discourse. So a non-genuine conversational turn. What does that mean? So there are examples of that a lot of people use. It's actually used in marketing a lot, which I think is interesting because in marketing, you can't really talk back to the commercial or to the ad. And so fictive interaction in marketing, they will actually ask and answer the question for you. They'll kind of answer for you so that you feel like you're in that interaction with them, even though you're not. So it's a non-genuine conversational turn. They're kind of giving you the conversational turn. As I say that, if you're familiar with Gestalt processing, did anything I just say kind of remind you of what a GLP does? Have you ever heard a GLP produce a fictive interaction where they might be asking and answering in the same turn? Or if you have been doing therapy with a GLP, have you ever done a fictive interaction where you ask and answer within one turn of discourse? So let me continue. Fictive interaction, and this is I apologize, this is a direct quote. Fictive interaction is the use of the conversation frame in order to structure thought, discourse, and language. Fictive interaction may partially serve to model, and there are 5 subtypes. May partially serve to model, number 1, cognition, which would be talking to oneself, which I see often. I'm going to be going back and forth between the quote and my commentary, which I know is not ideal. Sorry. So it can model cognition, talking to oneself. Sometimes when someone's talking to themselves, they kind of do that back and forth turn with oneself. And I definitely see this with GLPs when they're engaging in fictive interaction of maybe reproducing a conversation within a TV show, or reproducing some sort of conversation that they've seen in between YouTube characters. A second part of fictive interaction could be the conceptualization of an experience. An example that was shared was something like, again, this all sounds kind of like marketing. A good walk is the answer to headache. Because they are, they're conceptualizing an experience and trying to communicate an underlying story. So like a good walk, that's the answer to a headache. You can kind of imagine it. You can connect to the feelings within it. A third part of fictive interaction would be organization, like around discourse. So this might be something like a monologue that is structured as a dialogue. So it's all these ways that language is taking form that is not a back and forth conversation. If you think of a lot of the Gestalt processors you might interact with, or maybe you're raising one, the way they communicate with you, likely in the beginning, doesn't feel like a real conversation. Instead, you might be witnessing the child producing the different turns of a conversation themselves. You might also see this in play. Instead of turn-taking play, they might, with another person, they might be enacting or reenacting something that is maybe like not non-genuine turns, but they're showing you all of the back and forth turns that someone else might participate in the future. And then the fifth part of fictive interaction is just kind of what we would be used to, the language system itself and its use, and there's different grammatical levels. So I just thought that was such an interesting lens to like connect with echolalia. I recommend looking into the paper. I think it's really interesting. Fictive interaction, that's a newer one to me, but I'm always interested in learning more about how other disciplines can be connected to it. So like psychology, linguistics, I feel like I wish that we as a field had much more training in linguistics. But even about like discourse analysis, right? So thinking about how things like we think about conversation as between two people, but what if that's happening within one person's experience? It's just an interesting dimension to think about. The last thing I want to say about the fictive interaction is that very often this type of interaction or speech, or it could be AAC, or even representing things with objects, it does actually involve assuming someone else's viewpoint. I think there's misconceptions out there about autistic communication that, they can't assume someone else's viewpoint, or it's difficult to. And that's, there's so many shades of gray there. And it definitely can be very difficult for autistic individuals to kind of like step into the shoes of someone else or be able to share about what someone else might be thinking. You could argue that with a lot of people, though. But fictive interaction, at least the way that they talked about echolalia in this paper, so much of pulling a gestalt is pulling a chunk of information that was inherently from someone else's perspective. So if they're pulling a quote from Paw Patrol that a character said, and then they say it later on, they're communicating from someone else's point of view. So they were able to pull what they saw someone else say, connect it back to something in their life, and then express that as them from someone else's viewpoint. So that's the fictive nature of it. Also, fictive interaction could also mean the assumption of more than one viewpoint simultaneously. So this might be, you might have a GLP who does this. They might pull the entire conversation of a whole episode, and then they produce that. They do every single turn. They are then communicating from multiple viewpoints within the entire spoken gestalt. And so again, it's this idea of, okay, they witnessed something external that had meaning to them that they wanted to internalize. Later on, they're experiencing something and they're like, oh, that seems to map together. Let me express from multiple viewpoints. In this paper, they studied a bunch of kids, and they found that in general, these kids, they did not use this direct quotation or, these gestalts that they acquired. They didn't use them just to represent prior speech, kind of on the nose communication. I've got GLPs in my life who, they'll produce gestalts that are like totally on the nose, very clear. It's, you're like, yeah, what you said is very close to what you meant. Like anyone in your life, if the mailman heard you say it, if the cashier heard you say it, they'd understand what you're saying. They were finding that the direct quotation of the echolalia in the kids in this study, they really were using their echolalia and their direct speech to engage in something. I love this term, to make mental contact with past communicative situations. I really like that, to make mental contact with past communicative situations. I'm wondering if that resonates for anyone who's listening right now. If you've seen a GOP in your life where they reconnect to a gestalt or they say something and it's just, you're like, I know that you're making mental contact with something in the past. You might also completely disagree with me. And if you do, I'm so curious about that. I know gestalt processing, there's a lot of conversations out there. There's a lot of tension about it. So please feel free to disagree. I think that could lead this episode in a really interesting direction. Okay, so they're making that mental contact. But this direct quotation that they're engaging in, that delayed echolalia, these gestalts, it's not just, exactly about what's in front of them. They use this viewpoint shift, or they use that mental contact with the emotion or the feeling to describe situations, to express their needs, to refer to other people and to animals and to things. These fictive quotations, they may tap into kind of a depth of meaning that just regular words or more like a concrete naming or requesting might not tap into. They were even talking about how a gestalt could capture a sense of even culture. It could capture a sense of socio-cultural knowledge. It could capture the emotion, the dynamics between two people in a way that just kind of like regular sentences we would expect developmentally at that age might not tap into. I already said the last thing I'll say about fictive interaction, but if you know me, I love a tangent and I love to keep going. Fictive interaction, I'm just thinking about this now, so bear with me. Walk with me through this. Fictive interaction, actually, it reminds me a lot of like memes or popular audios that go around on social media. So if you're on Instagram or if you're on TikTok, you've definitely seen videos where people will use the same sound, right? They'll use an audio that's become very popular. The algorithm's going crazy for it. And it's one person on the screen, right? It's your favorite influencer. They're recording a video of themselves. But they're actually using a fictive interaction to communicate a point to you. So it might be, I'm trying to think of one that, oh God, what is it? I'll think of a good one, but just imagine, I apologize if you can hear my dog barking in the background. He has a lot to say right now. Thank you, Romeo. Doing your jams. Great guard dog. I'm going to make myself. He has a lot to say. Let me get back on track. We're very casual tonight. Thanks for sticking around. Okay, so you're on Instagram and you hear someone, they're making their reel or their story, and they're using actually an audio that's a dialogue from the original show, from the original YouTube video, from the original TikTok. That was actually a conversation. But now they're speaking both parts. The words are not literal, right? The audio is typically evoking an emotion and a context. The one I'm thinking about is like, I forget what the original person, like the first conversational turn is, but the second conversational turn is, Savannah, slow down. Very often, the person who's recreating that and doing the fictive interaction or is doing that direct quotation in their Instagram video, they're not talking to someone named Savannah, and they might not even be talking about slowing down, like the pace of what they're saying, or they're not literally talking about slowing down. But Savannah, slow down. If you've heard this one, it's basically communicating like to the other person, hey, like, let up. Like, and there's also like, there's a little bit of like maybe feeling criticized there of like, hey, you're criticizing me, but I need you to like back off. So it's got this underlying emotion and context that we as the viewer might understand and glean from it. The words are not literal. And that fictive element is the person making that reel or that story of that TikTok is taking on both roles to communicate a slightly different point. I talk about trending audios all the time when I'm trying to explain what gestalts feel like and how we all kind of communicate in that way. It's just, it tends to be easier when there's a shared cultural understanding. There's not a shared cultural understanding of that very niche quote from that very niche Daniel Tiger episode, but a really famous movie quote or that trending audio that's going around, there's a shared cultural understanding. And so it doesn't confuse us as much as a Gestalt would for from a GLP. I'm seeing some interaction in the chat, so I'm going to pivot away from fictive interaction, but definitely check out that paper. I think it's so interesting. The first thing that was shared, thank you, Julia. Julia said, so I'm very new to the idea of putting the skills to use. Just understand what a Gestalt language processor looks like, and I want to get a full training on the subject regarding the coaching and levels. Where can I do this? All right, so I have my answers, but for those of you who are here live, let me know if there is a place that you recommend that Julia seeks out more information and gets trained. My go-to for everybody is always meaningful speech. I mean, you know, other than Marge Blanc's book and Barry Prezant's work, like meaningful speech, they're really kind of like the OGs. I'm gonna get that link up. So many of the families I've talked to and therapists that like I've mentored who have done this first, they have really like the strongest base. So the link is in there for meaningful speech. I highly recommend that, Julia. But Julia, keep an eye on the chat if other people have other recommendations. Oh, the other one, I really love the women at Natural Communication. I think they're lovely. And I do have a video that's available on their program where I talk about music. So there's a link to Natural Communication, and they have one in Spanish, which would be really good for bilingual families or if you're working with Spanish-speaking families. And we have 2 people who support the idea of meaningful speech. Great question. Okay, so I'm backtracking a little. I'm going to see if I can connect these comments back to what I was saying. It looks like Jill said, I had one student who did it all the time. I always thought it was great. The challenge was explaining to other staff who insisted on more of that reciprocal conversation. Okay, so Jill, you're referring to this idea of the fictive interaction, right? So they were doing, and let me know if I'm wrong, but they were doing that back and forth conversation within their own utterances. I like the idea that, you know, you thought it was great, but the challenge was explaining that to other people. This can be really hard to explain, right? If you've got expectations for certain types of communicative interactions, and you feel confident supporting those, right? I think a lot of speech therapists might say that they left grad school or their CF and they're like, all right, I feel, at least in pediatrics, I feel pretty confident with how to help a kid have a back and forth conversation. But if they're presenting differently and they've got that fictive nature in only what they're saying, you might think, okay, I'm not sure what to do with this. And then imagine maybe a teacher or a para or even like maybe the music teacher or the gym teacher. They're probably going to have even less confidence. Not everyone. There are some like really amazing other like support professionals or other professionals who actually have like a much more intuitive grasp of this than maybe some SLPs do. It's really cool when you can meet those people. But trying to explain that to the other staff it can be really tough. That's why I really like analogy. If you've listened to my podcast before, you know that I love analogy to the point of like probably nausea on your part. And that's why I try and share as much as I can, because I found like, and you want to tailor your analogy to the listener too. Like if there is a parent who's a musician, I'm going to try and explain gestalts or these fictive interactions through the point of like how musicians work together. If there's an athlete, or like another teacher and you know that they're athletic, can you find an analogy there? The more you do this and the more you explain the ideas of Gestalt to people, you're going to start to build your toolbox of analogies. I'd say write them down. Write down the analogies that seem to land. If you get feedback from someone being like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, document that. So you can kind of create your toolbox of analogies for the future. I'd say for if you have a parent or if you have like a teacher or someone else you're trying to explain it to and they're chronically online, try relating it to memes. Memes are iterations. Memes are like mitigations. I will stand by that till the end of time. You know, the original image or the original idea, that's the Gestalt. And then literally all over the world, millions of people iterate on it. They mitigate. But that same feeling is underneath it. All right. You can fight me on that, but I will stick with that. That's my favorite analogy. What I'd also love to hear in the chat is anyone has found a successful way to explain gestalts or explain fictive interactions now that you have a term for that to other people, whether that's to parents, whether it's to other professionals. What analogies have worked for you? What kind of things have you said where other people go, oh, okay, yeah, I think that makes sense to me. I'd love to hear that. Taylor shared that something I said is that it reminded them of one student who says, don't do that. Go to your room when he's mad. This is so common, right? I just literally today, I've heard 2 examples just like this of a GLP where when something happened, they would access the Gestalt of what an adult said to them in an emotional moment. So they're having an experience of maybe, they're accessing anger, they're feeling anger in their body. Their brain is trying to find what language matches up with this feeling. Oh, ding, here's a situation when someone was mad at me. I feel mad, need language for mad. That person was mad and said this. But that person, who might have been a parent or a grandparent or a nanny, they said, don't do that, go to your room. Now, GLP, the ideas around GLP are that they can't, at least early stage, they can't yet engage in that pronoun transformation in their head. So they're going to reproduce it as that original chunk. They heard, don't do that, go to your room. Click, thank you very much, that's my Gestalt. I can't yet transform it to, I don't do that, go to my room. Like, why would they even, say that? If they could do the transformation, they might not want to actually go to their room. It's not a one-to-one, but it captures the emotion and the context. Ariana said you can't really hear him, which is about my dog. So grateful for that. He loves to be very protective, which I'm grateful for. Julia shared, that reminds me of my student who says, are you okay, Molly, when she's checking in on a person? Yep. Similar, right? That child heard that phrase when they were being checked in on. And so when they are replicating that emotional context, she goes into her head and pulls out that chunk of sounds, that sequence of sounds. Remember, it's all just sequences of sounds that a long time ago, a bunch of people decided had meaning, except for onomatopoeia. So she accesses that sequence of sounds that maps onto the emotional experience, and that happens to be, are you okay, Molly? Person she's talking to is very likely not Molly. But that phrase and that sequence of sounds, and I'm speaking mostly this evening about GLPs who are speaking. This In different forms, this might apply to non-speaking or minimally speaking GLPs, but most of this conversation, because that's really where my caseload tends to lie, is in GLPs who do speak. So that's the orientation tonight. If you work with a lot of non-speaking GLPs and you see connections between what I'm saying to your clients, please throw that in the chat. I'd love to hear your perspective on it. So yeah, the "Are you okay, Molly?" That is what that child is able to access because it matches up to the moment. Why wouldn't I say that? Isn't that what we say when we're checking on someone? Um, I remember one of like the most heartbreaking ones for me, and this was when I was like early to getting into Gestalt language processing, and I was like, oh, these kids, like they fit that profile. And this was actually the client who inspired how I started to really look into music and psychoacoustics and music theory. And basically like inspired the whole my melody method program and course. One of the first sessions, he was so upset and I think very scared of me coming into his home because it was early intervention. He was so upset, so scared because I'm a stranger. And he was crying. He was going, "You're okay. You're okay. You're okay. You're okay." He was not okay, right? But that is what he heard from other people when he was really, really upset. That is the language that he had mapped onto that sensation in his body in that context. And those of you who work with Gestalt processors and have learned or figured out how to modify your modeling, you might say, okay, in that moment, we could model, I'm sad, I'm upset, I don't like it. Because it's from the first person perspective. So they don't have to do that transformation of pronouns. But you're providing them like a language experience or kind of a model or a map. No, a model that better maps to the emotion. Saying you're okay to a kid who's not okay probably isn't okay. It just doesn't map well, right? It's not it's not a reflection of their genuine emotional experience, which then makes it confusing for other people. Because if they're seeing an upset kid telling themselves you're okay, it doesn't match up. So much of this modeling and how we shift our modeling with GLPs is say the thing that maps to their experience. Name the feeling you think that they're feeling. Model it from their perspective so that it's going to match up more easily to what other people can interpret more easily. And I love an idiosyncratic Gestalt. I love a Gestalt that is like, you have to do like 5 layers of detective work to get it. I take great delight in those. But the rest of the world is not going to do 5 layers of digging. Most people don't have the time or the energy or the like corpus of knowledge to be able to do those 5 different layers. And so it's really, really helpful to model potential gestalts that are easier for other people to interpret so that this kid can have more success with a wider variety of people. All right. Julia, again, thank you so much for your participation, Julia. I really appreciate it. She said, I do actually have a kid who is using a gestalt which involves, it says curing, but I'm wondering if that was a typo. Involves cursing. Ooh, good question. Who involves cursing? Okay, this I would love if anyone has ideas around this. This is a good topic. Okay. Any suggestions on how to attack this? He uses it when it should be used, but he kind of says it out of nowhere too. Interesting. Okay. I would love to hear people's feedback. So he's cursing. Let's separate that out. So he's using it when it should be used. Can you give some examples? I operate best through examples and anecdotes. He uses it when it should be used. He also says it out of nowhere too. Okay. You don't have to give examples of the actual words because I'm not going to say those. But like when it comes up in the times that seem logical. But also if you have examples of times when it doesn't seem to match it. Okay, so Julia shared something falls or breaks and he says, oh, shipwreck. That makes sense. Very, like, there's a lot of logic there. And cursing, this is a really, I find it kind of humorous when it happens. And I warn families, when I start working with families who are in stage 1, I warn them pretty early. I'm like, hey, by the way, at some point, you're probably going to say something when you get hurt or drop something, and your kid is going to sense that feeling, and your timbre is going to be so rich. Ah, they might pick it up. So just keep an eye out. I can confirm also, as a child, one of my first words or gestalts was, oh, blank, oh, shipwreck. And I used it perfectly. So when this happens, it is, I see it a lot. I hear about it a lot. It cracks me up. And also it is shocking and unpleasant to hear that from maybe a 3-year-old. What I like to do is what I call preemptive modeling, or like getting ahead of it. So this kid has already acquired, oh, shipwreck as this gestalt. It probably maps perfectly to the moment. It's like they acquired it from someone in their life saying it in a way that was interesting, and they were like, yes, thank you very much. That's very meaningful. I'm going to use it again. So what I want to do and think about is the next time that something like an oops happens, can you or another person get ahead of the O blank with something else that can be used? They're going to have the O blank forever. It's fun to say. It's interesting. It also gets a big reaction, right? And that kid might love the reaction from other people. They might love the widened eyes. The change, like the vibe in the room completely changes when someone curses. They might find that really thrilling and exciting. So can we get ahead of it? Something drops and you have a plan, your team, the parents have a plan to say something different, like, oh, yikes, or what? I dropped it. But you want to make the timbre of your voice and the pitch and the rhythm of it really, really engaging, because, oh, blank, or oh, blank. That's really rich and interesting. Can the thing you model preemptively be just as interesting or more interesting? So like over the top. Something drops. Oh, it happened again. Cartoon character voice. If words like timbre and prosody and all of that, you feel like the other people in this kid's life aren't going to really connect with that, say to them, sound like a cartoon character. Just like talk big, sound silly, cartoon character voice. So kind of getting ahead of it that way. I'm seeing something related. Taylor shared, this happens with one of my students where you replaced it with what the fish. That's fun. I think that's another fun way to handle it, is you're mitigating it, right? And you're mitigating it with something that might feel really silly to the kid. Because what the fish is surprising. That's not where fish go. That's not how we talk about fish. So that might be an attention getter. It might be silly enough for them to want to mitigate it and replace it. I think that's a nice idea. So you could do a silly mitigation. That's a strong idea there. Or kind of get ahead of it for the next time. You could also do kind of a contrived situation with the O blank, where you intentionally drop something and then you model what could be, I don't want to call it a replacement. It kind of is a replacement, right? But I'd say like a companion or like a correlate or just a different option. Because I think that O blank, like they're going to use that in the future, and it's a helpful way to release anger. But give them other options. Give them other choices that they can access in that moment. Now, if doing it in the moment, you're like, okay, but how am I going to know when it's going to happen? I don't really want to like do a contrived situation in front of them. What I recommend is doing video modeling. I recommend video modeling for everything, because it captures a moment that is you can then replicate over and over and over again with perfect fidelity. If I'm doing something live in front of a kid, even if I try my best to replicate it perfectly over and over, it's always going to be a little different because time has passed. Taking a video of something, though, it really captures that moment into a nice sensory package, which I then find it tends to, a lot of my kids Not for everything. None of this is for everyone. None of this is for everything. The kids I work with tend to pick up on gestalts more quickly if it's in video form. But I can kind of be in control of like what I say, what's on the videos. Back to this idea of oh blank. I prefer oh shipwreck. It just cracks me up. I say for us it's oh shipwreck and what the fire truck. Because the sounds are kind of similar. Phonemes are similar. But I'll take a video of maybe something dropping, and then I'll say the potential gestalt, like, oh, yikes, it fell. And then I'll immediately show that video, or when I'm with the kid again, to them, so that they can see the package of, this is what Corinne said. I watched something drop. Those map together. And if it is as interesting or more interesting, as emotional or more emotional in the way that my voice sounds, they may want to pick that up too. Julia also, you responded, I actually like that idea because that's what I've been thinking regarding he likes the reaction. Totally. That might be a really savvy way of him being like, okay, when I say this, I'm going to feel more connected to my people. I might get a reaction from my peers. My teacher might react in a certain way, and then I feel connected with them. And kids are kids. They like getting a rise out of us sometimes. What you said is there's the other times though, when it seems more random, sitting at his desk, nothing's loud, he's just chilling and he says it. That makes me wonder, like, could that be a way to try and elicit a connection and reaction from someone? If he's just chilling, he's like, okay, I kind of want to get a reaction from someone. I want to feel connected. Let me say this thing because I know it works. An alternative, and it'll be hard to know until one day maybe he can explain it to you, is he might be experiencing something, like mental imagery or reviewing something in his head that would necessitate that. Maybe he's thinking of a TV show or a YouTube video where something drops. Maybe he's replaying a memory in his head that requires that phrase. So that internal experience, he may then be producing that externally. I used to have a client who, she would just be in her classroom. She was little. It was preschool. But she would just sit there and all of a sudden just start giggling. She would just start laughing. And we always wondered, like, is she watching something in her head? Is she reviewing a memory? Like, it just seemed like she was deep in thought and something cracked her up. And so we were wondering, like, is that just like an external reaction to an internal experience? I want to make sure I don't miss anything here. Okay, great. Alessandra, thanks so much for getting into the chat. Alessandra asked, do you have an analogy or a way to frame to a parent the importance of intonation, prosody, timbre when working with a GLP? Of course I do. This is my life. I can think of two parents who reside in a pretty neutral tone of voice and feel uncomfortable applying suggestions in a session. Okay, I want to talk about the second part first, because tonight we were supposed to be talking about like emotions and emotional anchors. So let's talk about that. When it comes to emotion can be, we're always feeling emotion, right? We're never not feeling some sort of emotion. An emotion is extremely in flux. It shifts so frequently. An emotion is also super suggestive. Subjective. I was just talking to a mom today about her son is having challenges with like the basic emotions. And I was saying, well, all of that is so subjective because we as different cultures decided where the cut points are for certain like emotion words. But emotion is so much more complicated than that. My version of frustrated might look like your version of mad. Like these cut points, they're so different for each person. And so it's really important to think about, that was a bit off track. Let's get back. We're talking about my favorite things, so I get pretty excited. Think about the family's emotional experience in that room. So you might be really excited about these strategies. the kid might have a really excited reaction to heightened intonation, prosodic choices, intense timbre. So the two of you might be having a really positive experience of joy and curiosity and interest and excitement. But you also want to think about the parent's emotional experience and that discomfort, right? Expressing emotion can be very, very vulnerable. Play is also very, very vulnerable. Play is the suspension of reality for a little bit. Play is about not knowing what's going to happen next. It's about exploration. And yeah, kind of that suspension of reality. So when you're encouraging a parent to play in ways that maybe they haven't done since they were a kid, and something else I like to think about is maybe that parent in front of you wasn't allowed to play. Maybe their play was cut off. Maybe their play was criticized. I sometimes warn families that when they're playing with their kid, as I'm teaching you how to play or we're discovering play, the three of us as a team, you might have some anger come up. You might start to cry. You might have some big feelings come up because I'm asking you to do things that are very old in your brain. I'm asking you to tap into very old behaviors and old memories. That might feel scary. So the family in front of you, Alessandra, it might be even more than uncomfortable. It might actually bring up some feelings of fear, maybe some feelings of grief, confusion. This stuff can go pretty deep. And so I might actually, and this is the counseling side of it, I might actually lean into that depending on your relationship, like depending on what the therapeutic alliance is like, and how comfortable you feel with that kind of relational dynamic. I might dig into it. Tell me about this discomfort you're feeling. I noticed that this might not feel very natural to you. I'd love to explore why. Sometimes naming the discomfort and like exploring it with them can free them up a little bit. And so, yeah, just like acknowledging the feeling that they're feeling. So much of working with a GLP is leaning into the feeling, is connecting with the underlying emotion, is about us heightening our emotion. And so we're really acknowledging that, but I think it's also really important to acknowledge and like create space for the really like often scared, vulnerable parents here who really want help for their kid, and they're looking to you for those answers, right? So creating space for that, talking about the discomfort. There's a phrase that's like, if you can name it, you can tame it. That might apply. I don't know about the word tame because like they're humans, right? You feel comfortable applying that. Yes, I think the relational aspect of that can be really, really powerful because I call those pull back the curtain conversations. Like I can show up and be like, all right, today we're going to work on present progressive and here's how I'm going to do it. And like, this is the activity. But a pull back the curtain question is when I turn to the parent in the middle of the activity and I go, you know what? I feel like I'm not nailing it right now. I feel like the strategy I'm using isn't working. Can you and I come up with something that might work better? I'm pulling back the curtain on my own thought process. I'm showing that I'm a human. I'm inviting that family in. A pull back the curtain conversation here is kind of like you turn to the family and you're like, hey, I've been thinking a little bit about these techniques and I'm wondering how they feel for you. Can you tell me more about that? Because you're kind of breaking away from like you and kid or me and kid. And it's just like getting real with that family. You pull back that curtain and say, hey, is this working for you? It might not be working for me. Is this working for you? Should we figure this out? Very often it's going to draw that family closer to you. You're developing that therapeutic alliance. You're making the triangle stronger between the 3 or 4 or more participants in that child's therapy program. I'm going to find my way back to the first part, right? I had to talk about the feelings first because I love feelings. Not my own feelings. I like other people's feelings. I don't want to face my own. Analogy or way to frame it. Okay, so it depends on the family, right? If they really enjoy the science side of it, if they really love learning about their kid's brain, I will go into more about like the neuroscience. I'll talk more about auditory processing. I might lean into some of the findings of, your child, let's say, I'm assuming that your client is autistic just because, like, I don't know if I've ever met an autistic child who's not a GLP. Yeah. I've met GLPs who are not autistic, though. Important to note. I'll talk about how in the autistic neurotype, there's findings that they have an overrepresentation of speech sounds in their brain. And so the word, I use this example a lot. I apologize if you've heard it before. If I say gorilla, 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 you can split the difference, right? And like a neurotypical kid at the same age as your client might be able to split the difference and be like, oh, that's the same word, just said different ways. But an autistic child, they might have an overrepresent, like their mapping of it. It might be too detailed. And so to them, they've got kind of this overrepresentation of where like each of those words might be a very different word. And so like regular speech patterns, it might be too like convoluted for them to be able to be like, okay, there's really strong patterns in here. But it also, with more of that neutral monotone speech, the pitch range is a lot smaller. So pitch is the height of different sounds. So some things have really high pitch. You think about like a flute or a child shrieking in the grocery store, that's going to be really high pitch. Then there's lower pitches, I think like a tuba or like a train going by or a helicopter going overhead. I'm from Baltimore. There's always a helicopter going overhead. And I've recently realized I have a special interest in helicopters. And I'm leaning into it. So the pitch range, when it's monotone speech, if I'm talking like this, my pitch range is very small. And the frequencies of those pitches are going to be very similar to one another. So my voice might be 440 hertz, 444 hertz, 480 hertz in the very small range. Those are really close together, and it's not giving a lot of rich information. So the pitches are very close. But if I start to talk like this, which sounds ridiculous, right? It's kind of annoying. I try not to talk like this to adults. But for a GLP, all these different pitch variations are going to stand out from the noise better. All these jumps are going to help them like pull apart the syllable and the phonemes. Da, 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 da. My speech signal, the signals, like the auditory signals are so much clearer against the noise. And there's a framework called enhanced perceptual capacity or functioning. Let me look it up real quick. Enhanced perceptual functioning. This framework, and it is by, I think it's by, let me get you guys a link here if you're joining, about enhanced perceptual functioning. Ideas behind that are that in the autistic neurotype, they have like enhanced perceptual processing or taking in of sensory information. Like they really take in like and are paying attention to more visual details than a neurotypical kid. So like I think about my clients who like they see a little speck on the carpet that I would never ever see. Or they have this overrepresentation of auditory information or phonological information that might be distracting from speech patterns. Because there's overrepresentation, it's harder to pull out the averages. It's harder to pull out the patterns of monotone spoken language or more monotonous spoken language. But let me look back on what you're saying. Get off on tangents and I got to get my way back. When it comes to like really rich intonation and prosody and rhythm, basically what's happening is you're allowing your voice to stick out against all of the background. So with enhanced perceptual capacity or enhanced perceptual function, their kid might be paying attention to the sound of the Wi-Fi, the sound of the electricity, the hum of the train going by. They might be perceiving auditory information and frequencies that your brain is tuning out, or your brain doesn't even register. Your brain and body don't even register those vibrations, but the autistic kid in front of you might be. When you use really rich intonation and musicality in your voice, that suddenly becomes a more interesting signal and an easier signal to pick up on and pay attention to. So that's an important reason. The other part of it is that when you use these musical qualities and you push into them, you're making yourself often more memorable. So I think about so many movie quotes that have stayed with us, that live in your head like rent-free, the things that are memorable. First, lyrics to the songs you loved in high school, they're going to be in there probably forever because music is more memorable. Musical memory is really, really robust. So if you speak in a more musical way, the kid in front of you is more likely to, allegedly, anecdotally, remember what you modeled rather than speaking like this. Rather than speaking this. One of those is more interesting and memorable than the other. Annoying, yes. Memorable, also yes. There was one more element I want. There's so many reasons, but we have like 2 more minutes. I could keep going on this. What was it? Oh, if you're leaning into rhythmicity, if you're leaning into the rhythm aspect of it, and this is actually, we're going to end on a high note here. High note. The rhythm of it. For families and teachers and even for you, if you're like, I don't want to do a sing-song voice, I'm definitely not going to sing. Prosody makes me feel weird and vulnerable. I don't like it. Do rhythm. Rhythmic speech. Kind of chant it because rhythm makes you more predictable. We can be as therapists, as adults, we can be kind of unpredictable to an autistic kid or autistic person's nervous system. The world itself is unpredictable to a kid who craves that sameness, who craves predictability to feel safe. Rhythm in your speech can help make you more predictable. Because when I speak with a rhythm, I cut up the passage of time more predictably. I fit my words into a pattern, and a pattern feels really safe. When I speak in a rhythm, someone can anticipate what's coming next because it fits in mathematically to the rhythm that I'm doing. Rhythm is like a timekeeper. It's a way of separating out the passage of time, and it's a way of helping kids almost predict the future. If I'm just talking like this, they're not going to know when the next sound is going to come and unpredictable. What's going to happen next? But if I'm talking like this, they can mathematically predict where the sounds are going to go. That might feel safer to a family for whom the prosody and the vocal intonation feels too vulnerable, feels unsafe. Something to try out. And if you're a therapist where you're like, I hate sounding like a cartoon character, try the rhythm. In fact, if you've got a client with perfect pitch and you're trying to sing or be musical to them, they probably don't even want to hear that anyway. Okay, everybody. We made it. We made it through an unscripted, improvised episode. I'm wishing the best to Rachel, my guest. Again, she wasn't able to join because of an emergency. We're going to get her back here in 2026 for an episode. If you're joining on YouTube and you'd like to get credit, use my code Gestalt33. And if you're coming to ASHA later this month, please come hang out. I'm going to be doing a meet and greet at the Speech Therapy PD table. I would love to meet you. And also, if you meet me there, you're going to get a special promo code to my upcoming book and online course that I'm launching called The Playful Pivot. So please come say hi. All right, I'm going to be back here in 2 weeks with another guest. Thanks so much for joining the Gestalt Get-Together, and I'll see you soon. Good night, everybody.